Good morning, everybody, from wherever you're joining us across the continent and outside of the continent. My name is Nicanor Sabula, the CEO for Aesata, and also coming from you from Nairobi as CEO of Capt as well. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome everybody for this quarters webinar, our travels webinar series, and this is a webinar, the last webinar for the year. We've had quite a good run since we started in March, and I think this will be our fourth webinar, if I am not wrong.
Yes.
In this webinar, we are looking at a very interesting topic. For those of you that attended our annual conference in Harare, you remember we were tackling, cross-border business, and I think lots came out about the need for us as African businesses to look for opportunities within the continent, and for us then to be able to do that, we must reimagine what partnerships are all about. We must look at opportunities of reinventing ourselves beyond our borders, and creating, partnerships that allow you to co-create, these businesses. So that is a title of our webinar series this year, and we are privileged to be joined for this webinar by our very good friend Kumbi Chiweshe from Zimbabwe, who is going to run us through and sharing experiences around what it takes, to be able to build, cross-border businesses, and how we can co-create and be able to build opportunities across the continent. I know we are late, so I will not take much time. I want to acknowledge Gladwell, who is our Secretariat Coordinator. Thank you, Gladwell, for putting this together. I think you've been very consistent throughout the year, and this webinar series have been nothing but just enlightening. So feel appreciated, Gladwell, and I hope that we'll be able to receive to see you maybe towards the end as you moderate the Q&A session of the webinar. Over to you, and I think if Kumbi is online, Kumbi, we can hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, everyone who's on board, who's joined us today. It's a real pleasure, and thank you for the invitation to come and present today. I hope you can all hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So if you could just put up the presentation for me. Thank you so much.
Good?
Yes, it looks fine. Thank you very, very much. So my name's Kumbi Chiweshe. I'm the chairman of the Zimbabwe Tour Operators Association. And we had the privilege of hosting the, Zimbabwe had the privilege of hosting the Aesata conference in Harare just a month or so ago. And it was really terrific to see all the agents and the passion that everybody had towards the industry, towards all the topical issues that were raised during the course of the conference. But I think the thing that really made a great impression on me was the desire, and that's said in terms of the association itself, in terms of Eastern and Southern Africa, and we had people from even Western Africa participating. the overall desire to work together. And just looking at the definition of co-create before our presentation today, it struck me that this word co-create speaks to working together, but in a way that's more intentional than the normal word that we talk about. That's actually deeper than the normal word that we talk about, which is collaboration. So it's more of, there's more intentionality, more partnership, and it speaks to shared design, shared responsibility, values, and success. So it speaks to collaborative issues, but on a very, very deep level. So I thought that was really, really incredibly fascinating. And I think more than that, it spoke to me about a great desire on the part of everyone at Aesata and the travel industry as a whole. But as you know, there's so much that speaks to us more than travel. So I will touch on these. I beg your pardon, so many industries that are connected to the travel industry that actually need then to be co-creating and working together to make this all work for us. So without further ado, could we have the next slide on, please? Thank you. So Africa is a continent that it's a continent on the move. It's held back by friction. So this really, really speaks to rising demand, and certainly we see it in Southern Africa, but there's a rising demand for multi-country travel. I certainly see it as well in terms of the growing connectivity between East and Southern Africa right now. And the thing that we constantly hear about from travelers, whether business or leisure, is just the issue of borders and how complex it is to travel within Africa, how costly it is, and that there's so many rules that speak to traveling within Africa. And then also the issues of connectivity, although the airlines through their networks are growing increasingly, starting to help to address that. Where I see a lot of that is certainly within the Southern Africa region in terms of the Kaza region and the growth in terms of Victoria Falls as a hub for travel. And certainly in the private sector, the Africa's Eden Private Association is a great success in terms of co-creation, collaboration. What you realize from this is that travelers want to explore the continent. So there's no shortage of demand, but it's really the friction that slows us down, inconsistent borders, and complex processes. I have a feeling that momentum is shifting. And when we look at the opportunities for us when we coordinate, certain movement becomes easier for markets to open up. So we see now in the last month or so, there's now new flight connectivity and network that's opened up between Windhoek and Harare, which is interesting. Fly Namibia does the route from Windhoek to Victoria Falls, and then FastJet Airlines from Victoria Falls to Harare. And this is through the hub of Victoria Falls. And this is such an interesting new direction that opens up another route into Harare and travel within the region. Previously, that was only accessible through, for example, Johannesburg, or flying all the way up to Addis through Ethiopian. So this is showing that these things are possible. And I remember possibly 2 years ago when FlyNam started getting into flying into Victoria Falls, and the opportunities that are being discussed in terms of what are the opportunities beyond Victoria Falls. So it shows you the amount of time, but the desire was there, the amount of time and engagement and discussions that must have gone into these developing this route. And it's incumbent upon industry now to support that route, ensure that it's a success, so that there's continued investment on that route, or new routes actually, or in capacity building even on that route. This is the sort of thing that helps Africa. So it really shows the demand, and that the level of demand is there. And travelers definitely want to explore the continent, and we have to find ways and means to make that happen. Could we have the next slide, please? So why co-creation and why now? So there's no way that any single stakeholder can solve Africa's mobility challenges alone. Whether it's airlines, immigration, travel agents, or tour operators. So co-creation reduces duplication, it increases value, it builds trust. And trust is now a strategic asset. Travelers have to be able to trust that when they get to the destination, things are going to work the way that the tour operators are promised. The travel cards have to be able to work. There's a lot that's actually involved. Zimbabwe has a new e-visa platform now, and travelers have to know that when they process through the e-visa platform, that's going to work. And when they get there, what's been promised is going to work. So it's a huge, huge thing. And when there's that breakdown of trust, it can impact the rest of the experience within the value. Travelers also expect multi-country simplicity. So they don't think in silos. They don't think in terms of, especially, for example, if you're looking at European travelers now in the whole Schengen region, or the United States, they don't think in silos of the hard borders like we have. And we need to really be thinking outside the box now in terms of how to reduce that friction that I alluded to earlier. Moving on, and in terms of the 4 pillars of today's conversation, it's a really, really exciting conversation that the Aesata Secretariat have put together, and reimagining partnerships, innovating beyond borders, the business of co-creation, and connecting travel and trade. So let's look at reimagining partnerships. We really need our partnerships to move or to evolve rather from transactional to strategic. So this speaks to, just as an example, in terms of my region, Livingston and Victoria Falls, by extension, Kasane, used to be fierce competitors and the operators within those regions. But certainly just going into COVID, there's a shared resource amongst the 3 countries in terms of the Victoria Falls, and then this incredible wildlife estate in the Kaza region around them. That includes Namibia as well, because they've got the Kupivi strip within this area. It's evolved from, and especially with COVID, there was just a need to just join up together and present this as a single destination that the traveler could enjoy. And it's moved from competition to partnerships. That required a huge evolution from transactional to strategic partnerships. And that means, and even now, shared data, so whether it's occupancies, the buyers, to aligned messaging and unified positioning. This has now grown into a new tourism region within the hub that really occupies the space between, if you imagine South Africa on the one hand and East Africa on the other, there's this huge band in between. And that's the Kaza estate now that is occupied. And it's really produced a region where this great region now has traction. And we're seeing this working. So even on issues where we had the crisis messaging around Victoria Falls being dry, we see that there's been unified messaging, unified work together, and even the airports companies working together, as well as the private sector, and shared data to create this regional hub. And that's taken a great deal of coordination between multiple departments, including immigration, including the airport companies, including the governments beyond the private sector. And similarly, Vic Falls, Chobe, Livingston circuits and the Kaza operator networks show that this is possible when borders stop being barriers. And interestingly, at the time that we're having this conversation, Zimbabwe and Zambia have just had a bi-national, I guess you could call it, meeting between the heads of government, and announced that the Victoria Falls border post, which is the one between Livingston and Victoria Falls, is going to be open 24 hours a day. So it's a first step towards the reality of having these hard borders. There will still be customs checks, But in addition to the CASA visa, this starts to move us in the direction that frictions are being reduced. So looking at innovating beyond borders, there are now digital e-visas and e-border systems, seamless regional booking and payment systems, digital campaigns, and traveler data ecosystems. There's a great talk as well within our various travel platforms now where we, when we meet about the impact of AI and all the rest of it on tech. Innovation itself should simplify travel and not complicate it. So we find there's so much around tech and what needs to be done. We must always remember that our industry, it has people at heart, always. So digital visas, e-borders, seamless booking, real-time data sharing, they can transform the customer journey. And this happens between agents, immigration, operators, and airlines. These can all transform the customer journey. And we have to remember that the customer journey is at the heart of this whole thing. If it doesn't impact the customer journey positively, then it all really amounts to nothing. So we have, looking back at our region again, the digital campaigns that Africa's Eden runs are evidence that when we collaborate digitally, the entire region will benefit. So again, it speaks to impact on the travelers. So the business of co-creation itself, co-creation is commercially smart. Shared marketing reduces customer acquisition costs ultimately, and multi-country circuits increase length of stay and total spend. We see this clearly within our own region again, in terms of now multi-country circuits building, whether it's again speaking to Windhoek, into Victoria Falls, into Chobe or the Delta or Hwange. Those sort of combinations are building up, and that consistently raises yields per traveler. And so they're staying longer, sure, we're seeing that, and they're spending more within the region, which means a much higher ROI for the region as a whole. In terms of connecting travel and trade, well, tourism is the most natural catalyst for trade. And when movement becomes easier, SMEs thrive, cross-border flows increase, and business linkages are created. If you've ever been to the Victoria Falls Bridge, you see such an interesting ecosystem in terms of multiple countries sharing one tourism corridor, in a sense backed by coordinated multi-agency approach. So it's a very interesting ecosystem in terms of the tourists, the commercial travelers, and also the SMEs. It's guys on bikes, guys on taxis, but it shows how travel drives movement. And I remember going back to COVID era, how there was talk of, as soon as the borders were open, the airlines became again the facilitators of travel. And this has always been the case. And our role really ultimately is to be able to facilitate and ensure that, again, going back to the frictions, when these movements become easier, you find that travel thrives, cross-border flows increase, and these business linkages are created for the benefit of all. Co-creation in practice, really, I can give you a few working examples. I've spoken about Victoria Falls, which is really where we are. So the Air Access Initiative for Victoria Falls, where public and private stakeholders have aligned around route development, in a sense inspired by what Cape Town was able to do. I mean, Cape Town is really a shining example of in private sector and the public sector working together to develop air route access. And this is what's happening now in terms of Victoria Falls. And it's starting slowly and starting discussion at a time, airline at a time, and beginning to grow that. And travel is certainly buy into that once they see that these routes are available and these routes are staying and sustainable. The CASA Univisa project as well, which unites a stay within Zambia or Zimbabwe, and then a day visit to Botswana. It is a pilot that has been running a while and reduces friction for travelers across borders. Obviously, the travel industry would like this to be expanded so that certainly within the CASA area, you have one point of entry, almost like you have in Schengen, or better, and there are no borders between us, or no frictionless borders between us, so that travelers can move freely. There are a few security issues, I understand, relating to that. However, those are being addressed at the highest levels of government. In terms of the private sector, I've spoken about Africa's Eden and the joint campaigns and fam trips across the 4 countries. So this is such a wonderful initiative to look at. And certainly if you have the opportunity to look at the website and see the exciting things that are happening, it's africaseden.travel. And that speaks to just the campaigns, media trips, familiarization trips. I think there is one, if you guys are interested, that focuses on the Africa trade sometime in March. So you can sign up for that as hosted by us and come through to the region and just have a chance to experience, what is happening. And then in terms of cross-border agent partnerships, creating multi-country itineraries, this is where an agent in Botswana, agent in Zimbabwe, or agent in Botswana and Namibia, or across the 4 countries and Zambia are then creating multi-country itineraries, so handing over from one to the other. And this again lengthens length of stay, and then also ensures that at every stage there's multiple benefits for the different agents and actors involved. So it's really growing the cake as opposed to fighting over a small cake. So it's been a really fascinating example of private and public sector working together. And of course, involved in this is community and conservation as well, because without conserving the wildlife estate and the communities within this whole ecosystem, there's very, it long term, it doesn't work beyond the long term. So there's a commercial, there's a public aspect, and there's a community and conservation aspect. And it's a wonderful model to be able to look at. Practicalities, in terms of a practical roadmap, I had a bit of thinking around, I think it was in Harare, where I raised that, I really always like to have takeaways, when we engage. And these are really just more things to think about. And I'd love sort of action beyond today that gives us great ideas, and then we leave thinking that was a great talk, fantastic, and we sort of file it and wait for the next exciting one that the Secretariat will put. So I thought, well, what can we look at in terms of harmonizing processes for circuits? We've had a wonderful conference in Harare recently. Between now and next year, there's a lot of opportunity for us to actually get some actionables on the board. So looking at harmonizing processes for circuits between our respective regions, or in our respective regions, building marketing clusters, developing shared digital ecosystems. We've all got a lot of data between us that could be shared. How do we get this between us in a way that benefits all? And perhaps on an Aesata level, quarterly co-creation labs where these ideas can be brought into can be brought into a situation where we're now ideating and beyond the ideas, and then executables that we can actually then get us from where we are now to where we aspire to get ourselves. It is a simple, actionable roadmap. It doesn't require huge budgets, but more just alignment. The challenge for immigration And for our public sector is harmonizing borders facilitation for the regional circuit, and building cross-border marketing clusters in terms of the private sector. For the airlines and the travel agents that are at the forefront of engaging with the end users, strengthening air access committees. I challenged one of the airlines at the last Aesata presentation to ask, when a new route is developed, why not involve the key players that are involved in making sure that that route's going to work, in terms of the travel agents, tour operators, and other planners that are going to be involved in that process. Because there's a tendency when new routes are being developed for a bit of hush-hush, and then when they launch and don't succeed, questions why we're not supporting, which isn't always actually the case, because we do want this to succeed. And then obviously sharing, developing shared digital traveler ecosystems. Aesata's leadership, institutionalizing the quarterly co-creation labs to drive the implementation. So these are just ideas around what we can attain, around what we can achieve. And it is a challenge I'd like to put out there to see, how we can actually get some of these actionalized, if there's such a word. Success, what does it actually look like? Success is measurable, it's predictable, and seamless movement across borders at its heart. It's stronger road and air connectivity. For us, obviously, air connectivity is the big one. It's a shared digital backbone across agents, immigrations, and operators. It's Africa marketed as a unified destination and a collaborative mindset replacing the old silos. Remember, those borders were drawn up quite randomly, and in our minds, they still exist today. But if you imagine pre-borders, there were no borders. We just moved around freely across this vast continent of ours. This is the Africa customers want, and this is the Africa we can build. And these issues were raised during the Aesata conference, and it's a dream for sure, but it's a dream that can happen if we can collaborate, if we can co-create and really make it happen. In terms of closing, the borders that we have were drawn on paper, as I alluded to just now. Through partnerships, we can redefine how people move across this continent. We have the partnerships already. We have the Aesata platform, which has rich leadership and rich membership. So definitely it's possible to redefine how people move across this continent. The airlines are there and the networks are there. The future definitely belongs to regions that work together. And if we commit to co-creation, Africa will become one of the world's most compelling, connected, and competitive destinations. I definitely see it in terms of the vastness of the continent, the diversity of culture, the diversity of attractions, the wildlife estates, the communities, the rich heritage that this continent has. So it definitely is possible, but we have our work cut out for us, because it means we have to co-create and we have to stay connected and work together. Thank you very much. And yeah, I will hand back to the Secretariat. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to field them or do my best to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chiweshe, for that very insightful presentation. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope the rest of the audience feels the same. And once again, it was a pleasure to have you with us, because one, this is a very critical topic to the future of travel and tourism in Africa. And we have just begun this conversation on how trust is now the currency of co-creation. And I'd like to invite the audience for any questions, perhaps to the Secretariat or to Mr. Chiweshe, as we are coming to a close of this webinar. I'd like to hear from the audience. What do you think of this topic today? What do you think of the future of travel, and what do you think, how do you think co-creation is going to benefit us, given what we've heard today, given what we have perhaps researched or learned through the course of our businesses? What do you think is the best way forward? Feel free to raise your hand if you have any question or a suggestion or even a comment. We welcome them all.
Glad to just confirm that they can, or they need to be enabled, because I realized all of us were put on a wait. Just confirm that. Okay, I see somebody actually can. Zimtrek. Not so sure if they can be able to speak. Maybe you want to enable their, yeah.
Yes, I just did that. Thank you. Can we hear from Zimtrek?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Morning, afternoon, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank
good
you.
afternoon.
Thank you, Kumbi, for the excellent presentation. I did attend the Harare conference. It was quite insightful, and thank you, Aesata, for putting it all together. I do agree that collaboration is definitely the key for us to grow the sector and create more opportunities for employment and supporting industries. My question is, when in the discussion of collaboration and facilitating ease of movement, there seems to be, I'm not too sure how far we're going in terms of engaging with the airlines, in terms of improving the connectivity across the African continent. I know you touched on FastJet and Fly Namibia, but there seems to still be an issue of connectivity across the region, because in Southern Africa, I think, save for South Africa, Zimbabwe, sometimes you kind of do have a difficulty getting someone from, say, if it's from Lusaka to somewhere like even to Ghana, the loop, they have to go either via Joburg or something like that. They have to overnight in Ethiopia. I don't know if there's discussions that are happening to try and engage the airlines and even the smaller airlines to come in and bridge and fill that space. That's just my question. Thank you.
Over to you, Mr. Chiweshe. Perhaps you could answer that question for us. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much from Zimtrek Travel. They definitely are. Just speaking at the Aesata conference, there were representatives from the project for actualizing the Africa, the open skies in Africa. I forget offhand what it's called. But speaking to the representative, and perhaps as a suggestion, would be actually a very good idea to have them on one of these calls in future. They've put Africa into 5 sort of regional zones: north, east, west, central, and southern. I hope that's 5. And they've got sort of chairs within those zones to develop and deal with the friction points within those zones. Because at the end of the day, they've got the model that Africa is aspiring towards is like the European model, where airlines can set up and then fly across the continent. The practicalities of that is that it needs government buy-ins. I am not sure of the actual numbers that have signed up yet, as in they've agreed, but there's a good number that have already agreed to that. The one I know that's worked the furthest around, if I can call it, around the friction points that existed before, is Ethiopian Airlines, in terms of the agreements they signed with several airlines. So Zambian Airways, I think in the Central African region, they've got an agreement signed, Malawi. So they've worked hard to set up in different countries, but it's under sort of taking shareholding within airlines, and that's allowing them to fly more and more within the continent. You would want a model where Ethiopian Airlines, for example, or FastJet, or airline that from wherever can set up. Example in Europe is Ryanair. They just look at the markets that best serve their interests and the travelers, and they set up in the different countries. So it is work in progress. It will definitely require government regulations for that to happen. The flip side of it, if I can say so, from what I've observed, is that it's also commercial. The airline business is very capital intensive. So what's been spoken, there's another Southern African airline. I won't raise them at this point by name because it's still an ongoing issue within in East Africa, Southern East Africa, where they've put the equipment on the ground, they're ready to fly, but they've faced very steep regulatory hurdles in actually being able to fly, while the state is supporting the state-owned carrier, which is just highly inefficient, or has been highly inefficient, and not operating, on time schedule. So I think if there are regulators on the call today, opening up your aviation industry even to private sector players, it's not harming the state-owned carriers. If anything, it enhances competitiveness, and ultimately it helps the economies, because the economies are able to open as travelers begin to flow more and more in the region. So there are opportunities. Perhaps the best case example, if I can answer the last bit, is within South Africa, and looking at the growing connectivity of the South African carriers on the continent, Airlink being one example. They've just bought new planes, and are really, really starting to push further and further into the continent. And they feed into a network, their network and other networks, in terms of the agreements they've signed with other airlines. So I think Africa is at a tipping point between the regulation and the capitalization of the airlines themselves and the imagination of the airlines themselves. What will really make a big, big difference in terms of this is how the co-creation process, collaboration process between public and private sector will begin to work to make that really, really happen. I hope that's answered your question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chiweshe, for that. And before we even go to the next concern, we are joined with one of our very, very eloquent speakers and a great industry leader who is very vocal about enhancing intra-Africa travel, Captain Gilbert Kibe. Perhaps you'd like to chip in onto the question that has just been raised on what the airlines, or rather how we're engaging the airlines in terms of connectivity. Over to you, Captain Kibe.
Thank you very much, Gladwell. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. May I begin by saying that Kumbi Chiweshe, your presentation was excellent. I support you 100% in your findings and the comments that have been made thereafter. So I am in the air transport business. I'm a consultant in aviation, and I have also been appointed by the African Union Aviation Body, known as the Africa Civil Aviation Commission, or AFCAC. And AFCAC has appointed me the SAATM ambassador for the Eastern region. Somebody mentioned that they don't know what the name is for the open sky policy that Africa is trying to do. Its name is the Single Africa Air Transport Market, or SAATM. And SAATM aims to open the skies around Africa to enable African carriers operate seamlessly, easily, and connect all the cities in Africa together using facilitation by the various African governments. Now, the way that it is envisioned in order to create open sky is that you make Africa domestic to African carriers. You all know, being travel agents, the huge charges that government has in taxes, fees on charges on air tickets. African governments still believe that aviation is for the rich and wealthy people, and therefore, whenever they need a bit of extra revenue, they impose a tax or increase an existing tax. Air passenger service charge, security charge, safety charge, all sorts of charges, and there are many. And you will find that travel agents are the ones who best know this. 60 to 70 or even greater percent of the cost of a ticket are these government taxes, fees, and charges. So what we envision in SAATM is that if we change the taxes, fees, and charges system for travel within Africa to be domestic instead of international, you're looking at huge drops in those TFCs, as we call them, taxes, fees, and charges. So you'll find a case where we could reduce those charges by 90% or more, so that if in doing so, you will find that ticket prices will automatically go down for travelers traveling within Africa. And those countries will also need to open their airspace to other African travelers and introduce what is known as Fifth Freedom traffic rights. So this Fifth Freedom traffic rights allows an airline from country A to fly to country B, drop and pick passengers, and then from country B onwards to country C, drop and pick passengers, and then come back. What typically happens is that airlines are only allowed to go from country A to country B and back to country A. But Fifth Freedom will allow you to do multi-country services where there's freedom to drop and pick passengers wherever you go. An example is the Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines is the largest airline in Africa. And many airlines around Africa fear Ethiopia because if the government allows Fifth Freedom traffic rights for Ethiopian airlines in and out of their countries, those airlines feel that they will be run out of business. But here's the thing. To do Fifth Freedom traffic rights, there are terms and conditions for each airline and each country to implement. And so what we are advocating for is, if you can't beat them, join them. Therefore, the country insists that Ethiopian Airlines will have an interline agreement, a code share partnership with the airline in country B, and also another one with the airline in country C, so that even if Ethiopian is doing those Fifth Freedom traffic rights, there will be a revenue that goes to the affected airline. That way, airlines will be able to make revenue out of flights that they're not doing themselves. So we are looking for a win-win partnership among African carriers. Now, the hugest stumbling block is that African governments do not believe that SAATM will work, because of the fear that their national carriers or the designated carriers of each state will be run out of business. But that is not true. If you bring down your taxes, fees, and charges by 90%, and then you're able to bring down the airfares of a typical flight from country A to country B, charging $600, we're looking at a situation where the airfares can even come down to $200. What will be the impact of that? It means that the traffic between those states will increase exponentially. And therefore, Ethiopian will not even be able to handle the demand for travel between those states. Therefore, even that national airline, which is having an issue, will even get additional business for itself, and therefore both airlines will prosper. So this is what SAATM intends to do. Make Africa travel for Africans affordable, increase connectivity, and you will get traffic flow exponentially like a nonsense, and everybody will succeed. So that is what we are trying to do. And the question was asked, how many people have signed up? How many countries have signed up to SAATM? So far, we are 38 out of the 54 or 55 African countries. But guess what? Nobody has begun to implement SAATM because no two states have come together to say that we will implement open sky or domesticate the services between our two countries. There are only 3 countries that I've heard of that are willing to implement SAATM, and that is Ethiopia, Rwanda, and Togo. Togo is the smallest country in Africa, and its airline is owned 49% by Ethiopian. But guess what? None of those airlines have partners, and it takes 2 to tango. You cannot tango by yourself. So we're working very hard to try and get to meet these governments, meet these airlines, explain to them the features and the benefits of SAATM so that they may decide to begin to implement. And once it begins, there is no telling how far air transport will grow in Africa. Today, Africa is only 2% of global air transport traffic. And yet, we have 1.5 billion people. We're the youngest continent. And if SAATM works, we will become the single largest air transport continent in the whole world. Because, like I've said before, even when we were in Harare, when you look at the true size of Africa, the United States, all of Europe, all of China, all of India combined fit inside the size of Africa, and there's still room to spare. So if we had affordable air transport between us, we will increase tremendously and exponentially our tourism and even our trade. And remember, the African Union also has a trade program known as the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Air transport is the only way that we can trade among ourselves because of the size of Africa. So we're looking at air cargo transportation also growing exponentially in the same way as air transport for passengers will be. And those are my few comments. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you very much, Captain Kibe. We have actually really learned a lot, and I'm sure I speak for all when I say that some of us did not know a lot about what SAATM is doing or what the initiatives are towards increasing connectivity in Africa. And now things are being made clear. But then my question is, what are the steps? You said that not one country has implemented SAATM. So what are the steps towards encouraging countries to actually implement SAATM?
Okay, thank you, Gladwell.
And maybe, Captain, before you,
yes,
before you,
yes,
you come in as well. Perhaps also we also look at the issue together with. So there is an issue of the connectivity. On the other hand, there's also the issue of accessibility. And I see a question somebody has put on the group around visa accessibility. Because even in spaces where there's accessibility, flights can connect, we still see a hindrance in terms of visa accessibility. And as we accelerate, the connectivity, I think we also need to look at the the question of the visa question. Maybe you can also speak to that and the ongoing efforts around that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. What you have said is true. Our stumbling blocks is connectivity and accessibility, and also the lack of implementation of the African Union project known as SAATM. Now, the African Union already has developed 16 flagship projects for the growth and development of Africa's GDP that will be for the benefit of all Africans living in Africa. But there are 3 of those flagship projects that will ignite or oil the engine for that growth and development in our GDP. Number 1 is the Free Movement of Persons Protocol. It's an AU program that is encouraging or informing African countries to make movement of African persons in Africa possible, seamless, easy, and to the extent of not even requiring a visa. There are only 8 countries in Africa that have a visa-free policy for all Africans. Only 8 countries out of the 55. So if all of us decided that there will be free movement of persons in Africa, then accessibility issues will end right there. But here's the catch with the Free Movement of Person Protocol. African Union is saying that an African should be able to live and work anywhere he or she feels or finds an opportunity to work or to do business. That means I can go to Sierra Leone, live there, work there, or do a business there, and I'm a Kenyan. African countries have an issue with that. And the fear is there might be these countries that are so attractive to other Africans that they will come and flood a country and then remove opportunities for citizens of that country. But you know, that is not true. It's not possible. And there are places where that has happened and they were not inundated with people, so many people that it began to affect the citizens of that state. So we need to convince African states that that is not what is going to happen. And that is a major challenge because they don't want to hear. Our problem is African governments don't want to hear the solution that we're offering. So free movement of persons is a flagship project, number 1, that is very, very important. The second one is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which I've already mentioned, AFCFTA, to promote trade, Pan-African trade between Africans with Africans. So if let's look at Sierra Leone again, they grow palm oil. And the countries in East Africa, they're the ones who require palm oil to manufacture margarine, for instance, or soaps. Today, those countries import palm oil from Malaysia. So why are they not importing palm oil from Sierra Leone? Because they don't yet have the connectivity, and this is what Nick is saying, accessibility and connectivity, because we have not developed good facilitation programs for air cargo operators to fly within Africa, cargo within Africa. It becomes very difficult and almost impossible depending on which state you want to go to. So we need to change that mindset and get governments to agree that the way Africa will develop is by trading with each other. Africans will develop Africa to a huge degree. And then we will be able to have terms and conditions of how we'll trade with nations or continents that are outside of Africa. So we really want to promote AFCFTA. And then the third one is what I mentioned earlier, the single Africa air transport market. We open the sky, Africa becomes domestic to Africans, so that you don't need a visa to fly wherever you want to go in Africa. You can go and do tourism trips to other countries. You know, Africans have heard of Nollywood, and in fact, the Nigerian film industry is hugely popular in Africa. So what if you could fly to Nigeria, go to Lagos, instead of paying $800 or $1,000, it will cost you $300. Don't you think many Africans will want to flock into Nigeria to go and visit Nollywood just to see what this place is like? That is how you provoke tourism, but it has to be affordable. So we have made efforts, and Gladwell, you asked, so how do we go about this? From the years since SAATM came into being, and that was from 2018, we've tried many things, including pilot implementation programs. We visit countries, talk to them about the features and benefits of SAATM, but the people who attend, just like the Aesata conference earlier this year, the people who attend are the people who are already converted. You travel agents are already converted, but there was no meaningful government presence in Harare. So we have come to the conclusion that we need to visit each state, and in each state have one meeting with the president or the head of state and government of that country, together with all the ministers, not just transport and finance and trade and tourism, but all ministers, because everything is connected. All the permanent secretaries or principal secretaries, the directors in each ministry, the stakeholders, the airlines there, the designated airlines, the national carriers, and even the non-designated airlines, the tourism organizations and bodies, Aesata should be there as well. And every single stakeholder that is there, including the immigration people, the guys of the visas, if we sit them in one place at a state house and give them a 1-hour presentation of what I am describing to you, we believe we can convince a head of state and his government to implement SAATM from that time going forward. Gladwell, that is the biggest problem that we've had, because we've been unable to organize such a meeting. And it's only the African Union themselves who can organize such a meeting. The chairman of the African Union is one who can call a president and say, hey, we'd like to meet you. But that hasn't happened yet. And that's why we've not had any progress so far. So far, we're just talking to people who are already converted, like yourselves. And so, like I said in Harare, if you have the wherewithal to talk to your government, maybe you could convince them for us to be invited to make a presentation and explain to them the golden opportunity that all of Africa has today. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Captain Kibe. And I totally agree with what you're saying, that we need to engage our government, we need to engage our leaders in our individual countries. If this is to work, we need to build a trust between the public sector and the private sector so that we can move forward together towards enhancing connectivity and opening our skies. Thank you very, very much. I wish to welcome any further questions or comments before we close. As soon as we're done with the Q&A, I will invite Mr. Sabula to give us the closing remarks. So any other questions or comments before we close? I'd not like to close anyone out before we close. Anyone who has a comment or question? Thank you very much for those engaging in the chat. I can see people expressing gratitude towards Captain Gilbert and Mr. Chiweshe's presentations. Thank you very much for all who are participating, who are active during this webinar. Thank you very much. Any question or comment before we close? Right. I wish to welcome I wish to welcome Mr. Sabula to give us the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Gladwell, and for everybody. Kumbi, your presentation was spot on, and always a pleasure to listen to Captain Kibe as he makes his contribution. Very passionate about intra-Africa travel, and that's what we are all about. Aesata is about connecting Africa, creating opportunities for Africans, and we have a dream that one day we will roam our continent free, easily. We'll exploit, we'll create businesses across the borders, and that through this travel and tourism industry, we will rise, from the ashes and build a very strong global economy. That's our mission. That's our purpose of existing, to be able to just have conversations about how we can build our travel and tourism industry across the borders. Thank you very much for everybody that has attended this, and also for those that we have engaged with. And we will continue with the travel webinar series in the new year 2026. And eventually, I hope I can see most of you in Livingstone, Zambia, for our 2026 Aesata travel conference, all of you. So please, you can diarize that, put that in your diaries. I think we should be announcing the dates before the end of this month, and I hope that we'll see most of you in Livingstone for the Aesata conference. Thank you very much, and do have yourself a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you all.